Sometimes the cruelest things in life do not arrive with warning. They arrive quietly, slipping through the door while you are still trying to breathe, and sometimes justice arrives just as quietly. But when it does, it changes everything. If this is your first time on this channel, welcome, and if you have been here before, you already know that we do not just tell stories here. We tell the stories that need to be told. Hit that subscribe button right now because what you are about to hear is the kind of story that will stay with you for a very long time. Do not miss what comes next. Margaret Ellen Kowalski was 61 years old. She had lived her entire life in the same small town in Providence, Rhode Island. She drove a 2003 Ford pickup truck with a cracked left taillight and a rosary hanging from the rearview mirror. She wore the same pair of black shoes to church every Sunday for 11 years. Her hands were worn from decades of cleaning other people's homes, 5 days a week, sometimes 6. She was the kind of woman who brought soup to neighbors she barely knew, who remembered every birthday, and who had spent the last 2 years sitting next to her husband Harold's hospital bed, holding his hand while the machines kept him breathing. On September 9th, Harold Bernard Kowalski passed away after a long battle with lung disease. He was 64 years old. Margaret buried him on September 11th, a Wednesday, at the Holy Cross Cemetery on Broad Street. She drove herself home from the funeral. She did not eat that evening. She sat in the dark for a long time, and the next morning, on September 12th, she got in her old truck and drove to the pharmacy to pick up the medication she had forgotten to get the week before, because that week she had been planning a funeral. She was not speeding. She was not reckless. She was a 61-year-old widow, 24 hours out of her husband's burial, doing what she had always done. She was surviving. Now let me tell you about Derek Fontaine Wells III. He was 34 years old. He drove a silver Porsche 911 with a personalized license plate that read DFWO. He wore a Rolex Submariner on his left wrist, and he wore it loosely, the way men do when they want you to notice it. He had graduated from a private university with a business degree that his father paid for. He worked at his father's property management company, which he would tell you he ran, though the people who actually worked there would tell you something different. He lived in a 6-bedroom house in the Wayland Square neighborhood that he also called his own, though his father's name was still on the deed. Derek Wells had received 4 parking tickets in the past 3 years and had paid none of them. He had also had 2 minor traffic infractions dismissed through connections his father maintained with people who knew people. He was the kind of man who believed that inconvenience was something that happened to other people, and that the rules of public life were a kind of suggestion that applied to everyone except him. On the morning of September 12th at approximately 10:17 a.m., Margaret Kowalski pulled her old pickup truck into a metered parking spot on Weybosset Street, 2.5 miles from her home. She fed 2 quarters into the meter, which gave her 30 minutes. She was inside the pharmacy for no more than 25 minutes. When she came back outside, a parking enforcement officer was writing her a ticket. The meter had expired by 4 minutes. 4 minutes. She had lost track of time. She told the officer, quietly, that her husband had just been buried the day before, that she was sorry, that she would not have stayed if she had known. The officer was doing his job. He said he was sorry for her loss, but the ticket had already been printed. He handed it to her. It was $45. That would have been the end of it, except that Derek Fontaine Wells III was standing nearby. He had parked his silver Porsche in the loading zone directly behind her truck without a permit 15 minutes earlier. He had gone into a coffee shop. He was on his way back to his car when he saw Margaret speaking with the officer, and instead of walking past, instead of getting in his Porsche and driving away, he stopped. He looked at the scene. He looked at Margaret, with her worn black shoes and her red eyes from crying, and he said loudly enough for several people on the sidewalk to hear, "Good. Maybe next time she'll learn to read a clock. Some of us have places to be, and we don't get to just stand here crying about it." The courtroom gasped when they heard that, but we will get to that. Margaret took her ticket home. She set it on the kitchen table next to the sympathy cards. She looked at it for a long time. $45 was not nothing to her. With Harold gone, she was down to 1 income. The medical bills were already arriving, but she did not fight the ticket at first. She was too tired to fight anything. She planned to just pay it. It was her neighbor, a retired postal worker named Gloria Chen, who told her she should fight it. Gloria said, "Margaret, you were in there buying medicine 24 hours after you buried your husband. You tell that judge exactly what you told me." So Margaret Kowalski walked into the Providence Municipal Court on October 3rd at 9 in the morning, wearing a plain gray dress and her worn black shoes. She carried a folded piece of paper in her hand. She had written down what she wanted to say because she was afraid she would forget. Her eyes were still a little red. She stood very straight. "Before we go any further into this courtroom, I want to stop and say something directly to you. This channel exists because stories like Margaret's deserve to be heard. Not just by a few people, by everyone. Every week we bring you real cases, real people, real moments where the system either fails or rises up to meet its highest purpose. If you believe that ordinary people deserve extraordinary fairness, then this is your community. Subscribe to this channel. You will never miss another story like this one, and trust me, there are more, many more. The case came before Judge Frank Caprio of Providence Municipal Court. If you know anything about Judge Caprio, you know that he has been on the bench for decades. You know that he is not the kind of judge who hides behind procedure. You know that he believes, deeply and without apology, that justice is a living thing. It has to breathe. It has to feel. It has to look at a person and see a person, not just a case number. On this particular morning, his clerk called the case of Margaret E. Kowalski, parking violation, Weybosset Street, September 12th, ticket number PR 4471. Margaret walked forward slowly. She was small. The courtroom felt large around her. She held her folded paper at her side. A woman in the gallery who did not know her leaned over to the person next to her and whispered, "God, she looks exhausted." She did. She looked like a woman who had been through something that had no good words for it. Derek Fontaine Wells III was not in the courtroom. He had not been summoned. He had no formal role in this proceeding. But his words had followed Margaret here. They had followed her all the way from that sidewalk on Weybosset Street, through 3 weeks of grief and medication and unpaid bills, and into this wood-paneled room where a white-haired judge was about to decide whether a $45 ticket was worth $45. Judge Caprio looked at the ticket. He looked at Margaret. He said, "Ma'am, before we begin, can you tell me why you are contesting this ticket today?" Margaret unfolded her piece of paper. She looked at it, then she folded it back up and put it in her pocket. She had decided to say it from memory after all. She said, "Your Honor, my husband Harold died on September 9th. We buried him on September 11th. The next morning I drove to the pharmacy on Weybosset Street to pick up my blood pressure medication. I fed the meter. I thought I had enough time. I was 4 minutes over. I'm not asking you to do anything special for me. I just wanted you to know why I was not paying attention to the clock." She stopped there. She did not cry. She had run out of tears for the moment. Judge Caprio did not respond right away. He looked at her for a long time. And then something happened that people in that courtroom would talk about for years. His jaw tightened. His eyes filled. He took off his glasses and set them down on the bench. He pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. He was quiet for what felt like a full minute, though it was probably closer to 30 seconds. Now, I want to tell you something about Judge Caprio that his staff told the reporter who covered this case. In 1987, Judge Caprio lost his own mother 3 days after Christmas. She had gone out on December 28th to return a gift at a department store, and on the way back, her car was struck by another vehicle. She did not survive. In the weeks after her death, Frank Caprio had described feeling like he was moving through water, like the world was continuing at normal speed, but he was not. He said later that the smallest administrative tasks during that time, renewing a library card, dealing with a parking ticket, standing in any kind of line, felt completely impossible. Not because they were hard, but because the world did not know what had just happened to him. The world did not care. It just kept moving, and he had to keep moving with it, even when he had no idea how. He said he never forgot that feeling. He carried it with him onto the bench. He carried it into every courtroom, every case. Every morning he put on his robe and sat down across from ordinary people who were just trying to get through their days. That is why, when Margaret Kowalski said the words she said, Judge Caprio put down his glasses. If you are still watching, you are exactly the kind of person this channel was made for. Some channels just show you what happened. We want you to understand why it matters. If you have not subscribed yet, do it right now. Because the next part of this story, what Judge Caprio did and said next, is something you need to see all the way through. And so is every story we tell after this one. Subscribe. Be part of this. The prosecuting attorney, a young man named Tyler Barnes, who was handling roughly 40 cases that morning, looked at his notes and said the ticket had been properly issued. He said the meter had expired. He said the law did not make exceptions based on personal circumstances. He was not being cruel, he was being procedural, he was doing his job. He said, "Your Honor, the city respectfully requests that the fine be upheld." Margaret nodded slightly when he said that, as if she had expected it, as if she was accustomed to the world not making exceptions for her, and then Judge Caprio spoke. He said, "Mr. Barnes, I appreciate your position, I do. And I want to be clear that I respect the work of our parking enforcement officers. They do a difficult job." He paused. "But I also want to be clear about something else. This court has a responsibility that goes beyond the letter of any ordinance. It has a responsibility to look at the whole person standing in front of it. And the whole person standing in front of me today buried her husband of 38 years, 24 hours before she received this ticket." Tyler Barnes said nothing. Judge Caprio turned to Margaret. He said, "Mrs. Kowalski, how long were you married?" She said, 38 years in July. He said, "What did Harold do for work?" She said, "He drove a school bus for 22 years. Then his lungs got bad and he had to stop." Judge Caprio nodded slowly. He said, "And you have been his caregiver?" She said, "For the last 2 years, yes, Your Honor." The courtroom was completely silent. You could hear the ventilation system in the ceiling. You could hear a pen tap on a notepad somewhere in the back row. Then Judge Caprio said something that nobody expected. He said, "Mrs. Kowalski, I am going to dismiss this ticket, every penny of it. You owe the city of Providence nothing today." And then he kept going. He said, "But I also want to say something for the record, because this court is a public institution and what happens in it should mean something beyond the cases themselves." He put his glasses back on. He looked at the courtroom. He said, "I have been told that on the morning Mrs. Kowalski received this ticket, there was a witness on the sidewalk, a man who saw what was happening and chose to make a comment that was meant to humiliate a grieving woman." He looked down at his notes. "I was told," he said, and I am quoting, "Good, maybe next time she'll learn to read a clock. Some of us have places to be and we don't get to just stand here crying about it." The courtroom stirred. A woman in the third row closed her eyes. Judge Caprio said, "That man is not here today. He has no legal standing in this matter. I cannot sentence him to anything." He paused again. "But I want to say this. If you are the kind of person who sees a grieving widow on a sidewalk and your first instinct is contempt, then you are carrying something inside you that is far more expensive than any parking ticket. And eventually, life will present you with your own bill." By the time he finished speaking, there were people in the gallery who were crying openly. The court reporter had stopped typing for a moment to compose herself. Tyler Barnes was looking at the floor. Margaret Kowalski stood very still with both hands at her sides, and she said very quietly, "Thank you, Your Honor. We are now going to talk about what happened next, and I want to say this first. We are building something on this channel. We are building a community of people who believe that one person's pain is everyone's responsibility, that dignity is not a luxury, that a judge who cries on the bench is not weak. He is exactly what a judge should be. If that sounds like something you want to be part of, subscribe right now. You belong here. This is your community too." The video of this court proceeding, recorded as part of the court's own documentation program, was later shared publicly. It spread quickly. Within 72 hours, it had been viewed by more than 2 million people. The comments were overwhelming. Thousands of people shared their own stories of receiving a bill or a ticket or a notice during the worst moments of their lives. The world did not stop for their grief either. They knew exactly what Margaret felt standing at that meter. The city of Providence received a call from a local nonprofit organization called Neighbors First, which provides emergency financial assistance to widows and widowers in the city. They had seen the video. They offered to cover 3 months of Margaret's household expenses while she got her footing back. She accepted. Harold's former colleagues at the school bus depot took up a collection and sent her an envelope with a handwritten note from each person. There were 23 notes. She kept them in a box next to the rosary from her rearview mirror, which she had brought inside after Harold passed because she could not look at it every day anymore. Derek Fontaine Wells III also saw the video. His name was not in it. But enough people on the sidewalk that morning had heard him that his words got back to him through channels he had not anticipated. His father called him. His father, a harder and older version of Derek, was not typically given to sentiment, but apparently even he had a line. He told his son that he was embarrassed. That was the word he used, embarrassed. Derek posted nothing publicly. He did not apologize publicly. He was not required to. But two of his former colleagues from the property management company said later that he had been quieter in the weeks following the video, that he had stopped telling certain kinds of jokes, that once, in a staff meeting, when someone made an offhand comment about a tenant who was behind on rent, Derek had said briefly and without elaboration, "Let's not do that." They said it was the first time they had ever heard him say something like that. It was small. It was not a redemption story written in headlines, but it was something, a small door opening. I think about this case often. I think about it when I hear people say that judges are just bureaucrats with robes. I think about it when I hear people say that the system never sees you as a human being, because sometimes it does. Sometimes there is a man on the bench who lost his mother on December 28th and never forgot what it felt like to stand in line while the world kept moving. And sometimes that man looks up from a $45 ticket and sees everything. He sees 38 years of marriage. He sees 2 years of sitting next to a hospital bed. He sees worn black shoes and a cracked tail light and a rosary hanging from a rearview mirror that cannot hang there anymore. He sees the full weight of a human life, and he says, "You owe nothing today." This case is about more than one ticket and one morning on one street. It is about what we owe each other when the most ordinary moments of life arrive in the middle of the most extraordinary pain. It is about the gap between the rule and the person. Every system has that gap. The question is whether the people inside the system are willing to step into it. Judge Caprio stepped into it. He did not have to, but he understood something that gets lost sometimes in the machinery of courts and fines and ordinances. He understood that justice is not the same thing as correctness. You can be technically correct and still be wrong. You can dismiss a ticket by the book and still fail the person standing in front of you. He did not fail Margaret Kowalski. He saw her, and sometimes being seen is the most powerful thing the law can offer. To anyone watching this who has ever had to keep moving through paperwork and obligations and the grinding forward motion of daily life while carrying a grief so heavy you could barely lift your arms, I want you to know something. You are not invisible. The machine does not always see you, that is true. But people see you, and there are judges and neighbors and strangers on the internet and communities built in the comment sections of videos like this one who are watching out for the Margarets of the world. You matter, your grief matters, your exhaustion matters, the 38 years you spent loving someone matter. Do not let anyone on any sidewalk tell you otherwise, not for a second. And to anyone watching this who has ever had the impulse that Derek Wells gave into on that sidewalk, the impulse to look at someone struggling and respond with impatience or contempt or the comfortable cruelty of someone who has never had to read a clock through tears, I am asking you to sit with something tonight. I am asking you to think about what it costs you to be kind. I am asking you to remember that every person you pass on every sidewalk is carrying something you cannot see. Your Rolex does not make you more human than the woman in the worn shoes. Your Porsche does not make your time more valuable than hers. Remember that. It is free, and it will make you someone worth being. This story spread for a reason. 2 million views in 72 hours is not an accident. People shared it because they recognized something in it. They recognized the exhaustion of grief and administration arriving at the same moment. They recognize the rare and stunning relief of being seen by someone in a position of power. They recognize the dignity of a woman who held herself together in a courtroom when she had every reason to fall apart. And they recognized a judge who did not hide behind the safety of procedure but stood instead in the full emotional weight of what was in front of him. That is what this channel is here to celebrate. That is what every story we tell is reaching for. Thank you for watching this entire story. Thank you for sitting with Margaret and her worn shoes and her rosary and her $45 ticket and the 38 years behind it. Thank you for caring enough to stay until the end. That matters more than you know. This channel exists because you exist, because there are people out there who want more than noise, who want stories that mean something, who believe that justice is worth paying attention to, who believe that one judge putting down his glasses and telling a grieving widow she owes nothing is worth 2 million views and then some. Subscribe to this channel right now and join this family. We are here every week with stories exactly like this one. Stories about ordinary people who walked into extraordinary moments. Stories about the courts and the judges and the small rooms where the weight of human lives gets placed on a scale and someone has to decide what it all means. We are building a community that believes every person who walks into a courtroom deserves to be seen as a full human being. We are building a community that believes grief is not an inconvenience, that dignity is not a luxury, that the law at its best is an act of compassion. Subscribe now and be part of something that matters, not just to you, to Margaret, to every person watching this in their own version of the morning after the worst day of their lives. Join us. Stand with us. Be someone who chooses to stay until the end of the story, because the end of the story is where justice lives. Subscribe and let us build the world we want to live in together, starting right now.